Have you ever wondered how ANOTR produces emotional and straight up cool house music that always brings the energy of the crowd way, way up? Well, in this video, we're going to be making a hypnotic deep house song inspired by another song, 6 a.m. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of music production. What you're listening to is the finished song we'll be breaking down today. And I'm going to show you how this Ableton project file was made, layer by layer, in the original order I followed, so you can easily follow along yourself. This tune only took me about 6 hours to finish, completely arranged, mixed, mastered, and ready to be used in DJ sets and sent out to record labels. After having produced music for over 15 years, this is easily the fastest and best way I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. But for now, let's start with the first of the 4 quick and easy steps we'll be covering today. First, make sure your song is inspired by the quality of a professional example by choosing a reference track. But stop yourself from straight up copying your reference by having a new hook to focus on. For each one of my projects, I like to make a project file page like this to act as a guide to kind of show all like the little details, go through the process in more detail. But for this one, so for the reference track, chose another song, 6 a.m. Been kind of the mindset that I had for picking this is a couple things. One is kind of been following these guys for a little while. Been watching a lot of really cool mixes that they've been putting out. They have this really cool way of making songs, and also when they're just DJing, they do this. But it's like very chill, laid back music, very cool sounding stuff, but at the same time it's like very high energy and kind of gets the crowd going. So it's super interesting. And then another thing that I've been noticing too is just on like YouTube in general, if you're looking up another's sound, like trying to figure out how to like tutorials on them, it's a lot of like minimal house, and they're kind of put in the same bucket as artists like Sweely and Rosie and Toman, who are really cool also, but they do that minimal house where it's kind of like weird sounds flying all around. It's very sound designy, whereas another is like they're minimal house in the sense that they use very minimal elements. It's almost more like disco-y, and I don't know, it's very different. So I feel like it was a cool opportunity to kind of nail the actual kind of like deep housey another sound that I don't see nailed as much here on YouTube. Then in terms of the new hook, the remix, I went for a remix, and it's this really, really, really cool group called Otukin. And what they are is a Russian Serbian indigenous folk group, and they blend a lot of like electronic elements as well, but they do that really cool like low pitched vocal, as well as that kind of like higher pitched, I don't know how to describe it, I guess indigenous sounding vocal, similar to A Tribe Called the Red, if you've ever heard them. Kind of has that kind of cool vibe. And I really went for this because 2 main reasons. One is on my phone when I'm on like Instagram, I guess adapted the algorithm so it'll send me stuff like this all the time. So I'll just save stuff like this to my little saved area so I can go and have a look and find new things to reference or new things to remix. And then also like this 6 a.m. tune in particular, I was kind of like imagining it as very like mystical. It sounds like it's very drawing on more like Eastern sounds more than as opposed to Western sounds. So I was trying to find something kind of more mystical and hypnotic, and kind of this just seemed to work perfectly. It was such a really cool idea. But with that said, you might be wondering, like, okay, when you're kind of doing your own project here, finding a reference and remix, how do you know that this is actually going to work together? How do you know that you're not going to spend like hours and weeks working on the tune just to find out it doesn't actually work? So there's a couple different things that we're going to do, little checkpoints in this first phase. But one of the first things here is just to do a little bit of music theory. So the reference song here is in the key of B, and the remix track is in the key of D. So they're both major keys, so that's really useful. I have this little music theory cheat sheet, so we can kind of have a look here. So from B, the distance between B and D is 1, 2, 3 semitones. So it's not too big of a jump. That means that we can kind of pitch things up and down or have them meet in the middle without turning anybody into a chipmunk or anything annoying like that. And then in terms of the BPM, the reference, another song is in 128 BPM and the remix is in 118. So there's a bit of a distance, but I think it's not too far that it's going to be a problem. The problem would be if you're looking at 128 versus something like 74 or something like that. You can kind of get that chipmunk sound and that kind of stuff. But really the main thing now is to actually jump inside of our DAW, and we're going to set up our project in a very specific way to make sure that we can work fast and get a really, really awesome result. First, add your reference and new hook into your project and use empty MIDI clips to better understand your reference's song structure. Now we can focus on the backbone of our entire song. So have a listen and see if you can tell me what makes this so special. So for me, it's really all about the simplicity and the subtlety. So it's a very minimal drum beat. It's almost like just like a disco kind of drum beat with some shakers layered in, as well as kind of a little bit of a very subtle bongo layer, adding a bit of extra groove. So when we're recreating these drums, that's really what we're going to want to focus on here. But it's important we create more and overthink less in our first hour of producing. You can do this by creating a temporary top loop by extracting the drums with AI, but then cutting everything below 200 Hertz. And you can control the low end by slicing a kick drum from the reference before cleaning it up with a filter envelope or Ableton 12's Show Similar Files feature. But lately I've been really loving this beta plugin called Drum Clone. And so I'm just gonna open it up here. And when you throw the sliced kick drum into it, it sounds like this. So you can hear there's like some kind of crispiness and like the high end, maybe there's some other drums being layered in there. And then what it does is it resynthesizes it so it sounds like this. So it's a really nice way to get a clean kick drum out of your slice, and now it's actually a synthesized kick, so it's actually something that's original, so you're not actually stealing anything from the other song there, which is really cool. And then there's sometimes a little bit of processing that I'll throw on here. Nothing too crazy. I like to keep my kicks pretty clean. In this instance, I'm just throwing on some drum bus, adding in some boom, which is kind of adding in some of that like subby low end to the kick drum. But really the big 80-20 secret here is to dial in the volumes by flicking back and forth between your reference. And although this quickly gives us drums to start off our song with, it's still hard to know if our low end is done right when half of it is missing. So for the bass, one thing that I like to do is start off with the pattern, and I've been using a program called Stems to isolate out the drums and everything like that, like the AI extraction. One cool thing about Stems is it'll slice out everything. So it'll do the drums, bass, vocals, and synths all in one kind of process. And so I have the AI bass here, and what you can do is just grab that isolated bass onto an empty MIDI clip, and Ableton's convert audio to MIDI function will happen. I'll use the melody function, and what this will do is it will create the MIDI based on that audio, and it'll kind of get you in the ballpark. It's a good place to start. It's not always going to be the best. Again, you're going to want to flick back and forth between the reference and what you're working on so that you can fine tune the notes. But that does get you in the ballpark, which is kind of nice. Then in terms of the sound, what I like to do is I start off with a sub sound. And the main reason is that we're taking care of the low end really here. And it's almost like playing like a guitar or a piano when you're figuring out like any kind of notes. You can really just focus on the low end without the sound design kind of messing you up. I've created my own little thing here called a V sub, a little instrument. It's just an operator playing a sine wave, which is a really nice basic wave shape that's really good at carrying low end. And then we just dial in a little bit of saturation to taste so that sub is going to come through speakers a little bit better, particularly like laptop and phone speakers. And it's also going to add a bit of harmonic content in that low mids area because we're going to be layering on a mid bass layer. So let me play that bass by itself. This is just the sub. You might want to have headphones in for this. And then with the drums. And then the next layer I'll add in is this mid bass layer. And you notice there's no MIDI here. I'm basically routing in the MIDI from the sub layer into here and then using a pitch device if I need to change the octave at all. This way, if you're building out your song and you change the MIDI notes at any point, you don't have to copy and paste over a million times onto all these other tracks. And so this bass guitar layer, if I solo this out, it sounds like this. And so what this is I took a slice of the, right here, you can see I took a slice of the AI bass and did the show similar files feature. And that'll also show you like plugins, particularly like the Ableton stock plugins. And so from that, I was able to find this bass trigger bass, that basic trigger bass that I've been actually kind of using in a couple songs now that I like quite a bit. And then that's kind of getting like a bass guitar tone. That's basically what the sound is in the ANOTR tune. And then there's some processing going on here. Main thing is, some things I've been experimenting here is adding this erosion. So without the erosion, it sounds like this. So that's really what the sound mostly is. And then with it on, this is almost more of like an arrangement trick. So what I'm doing is, you can see by the red dots down here, throughout the track, I ended up dialing in the amount more and less and moving the frequency around so that the bass is kind of moving and evolving a little in a subtle way. For the most part, it sounds like how it is without this erosion on at all. A little of this like Gyoko echo that I think I saw from some other tutorial, just dialed in a little bit, adding a little bit of width to this mid bass. And then the main thing here when you're doing a mid bass versus a sub is you want to make sure like around 200 hertz is getting removed. In this instance, around 147 is where I cut it off. And you want like this low end to mostly be taken care of by the kick and the sub. And then that way you don't have to worry about like when you're messing around with, let's say, like this erosion and adding echoes and stuff like that to the mid bass layer. You don't have to worry about it messing with your low end because the subs here is taking care of that completely. And then we're just running into the standard channel strip that I have here. We're using mostly just a one knob sidechain. This is also on the sub layer, I should mention here. It's just all built into this rack right here. SC is the sidechain, and it's just using Ableton's Max for Live shaper device to pump to quarter notes, I believe. So it's basically just pumping to the kick, which the kick is also doing quarter notes. And then rolling off a little bit of the highs there, and then all together the bass sounds like this. I'm going to turn off the erosion. And then how it sounds with the drums. Cool. So the main thing here is, if you have a look at the MIDI notes, I don't know exactly how to describe what's being played here, but this is a little bit different than how it sounded with like when I did the audio to MIDI functionality. Because the idea is like I'll try to start by closely copying the notes and the pattern of the reference track. Then I like to add in the vocal as quickly as I can. So in this instance, I'm going to add in the vocal from the Otuken tune. Basically, I grabbed like I'll play it for you actually, like this high part. And then also like this cool like low throat singing part. And so at this point in the production process, I like to have the new hook in the tune and then adjust the bass notes and a little bit of the bass sound, but mostly the bass notes, so that it is more reflecting and in service of our new hook. And it's also pushing away from being a carbon copy and exactly the same as our reference. So it's more original and usable. So all together, let's have a listen to what that sounds like. And so around this point, this is what I usually get done in the first 30 to 60 minutes of producing. And it's possible for you to do that too if you work in this kind of clever or smart way. And the idea here is to fail fast and fail often. It's a growth hackers kind of technique, and it can really save you hours of precious music making time because we're kind of skipping a lot of that time, like really dialing in kick drums and doing all this work on the drums, and then only to find out way later when we're actually building all the melodic elements like the bass and the chord progression and how it's working with the hook, finding out that it actually doesn't work, and you've wasted 3, 4, 5 hours or even weeks of time producing. This way we can just work a little smarter, get to the melodic stuff first, confirm our vision is working, and then move on. And so also like a really cool thing that goes beyond that even more is we fast tracked our way to creating, basically making a creative playground for us to have fun with. And this next step is going to be building up the loop in a way that is going to make turning that loop into a finished song, like you're going to be able to do it in like half the time. And so now we have drums and a bass and vocals, and we can go nuts on building out fun layers and all that kind of Stuff that I feel like almost every producer loves to do. All right, so take a listen to the melodic elements and kind of pay attention to how they play off of the hook, as well as the drums and the bass that we've built so far. And then now without the vocals. And then by themselves, this is just the melodic group by itself. So the main thing that I was kind of going for was, like, in the 6 a.m. tune, there's this very, like, mystical sounding kind of pad idea. And that's really what I was trying to get in there. I was looking up a lot of, like, Arabic sounding samples inside of Splice. So we'll just kind of like have a listen to the melodic group by itself, and we'll kind of just go over some of these layers that are a little bit more interesting. I want to be a little bit cautious here, because I do feel like when you're building out a tune like this, when you're building out the melodic layers like this is really, really the best part for you to really incorporate your own style and take things in a direction that's very unique to you, and start moving the song into a direction that's more unique and has your sonic identity into it. So definitely I'd encourage you to like take inspiration from the ideas here, but to really go crazy when you're doing this kind of thing yourself. So the first thing that I added in was this kind of little, I call it the Afro ding. And so I just Afro ding because I've been hearing that kind of sound in Afro house a lot. That's kind of where the inspiration came from there. I looked up, I think I was looking up Arabic stuff on Splice and just setting it to the same key as our tune to find out some good samples. I found this one from Kashmir and then just kind of cut it up so it was just hitting more of a rhythm that I was interested in. In terms of any processing, I throw in this crystallizer here. This is mostly just coming in different parts of the arrangement to kind of add some grainy delay. So it's just like a little more of an arrangement trick, if anything. And then we're running into an EQ8. We're moving everything under 200 hertz. I've set up my template so this automatically happens. Just trying to make sure that we're not adding up too much mud or anything on the low end. We want our low end to mostly be kick and bass. We're playing around with this erosion a lot more. So just adding a little bit of like grit-ishness to the sound. And then the standard channel strip. So I'm dialing in the attack, or increasing the attack. So like each transient, the initial hit of the Afro ding is hitting a little bit harder, and then dialing back the sustain so that it's ringing out less. So it's tightening up the sound. This is just the 3 kilohertz transient shaper that I've just mapped the core knobs to enable to interact so I can work a lot faster. Then a little bit of sidechain. So this is just pumping to quarter notes against the kick. Doesn't need, so this way you can get a sidechain effect without having to like route compressors or anything like that. It's like a 1 knob sidechain, which is really, really handy. I'm not using this width plugin here, but this is the Polyverse Wider. It's a free plugin as well. And I've just, again, mapped the core knob. We're not using it here. And then this is another awesome free one, A1 trigger gate, using it on like this transgate echo, which I'm finding is really cool for like dubby echoey sounds. And in this instance, I'm kind of just turning it off and on throughout the arrangement to kind of add like a bit of spaciness, but not throughout the entire track. So if you have a listen to it, it's on there at the beginning and it's kind of like jittering back and forth, but then it's not happening the entire time. Now it's just straight. Little tricks to kind of like make the sound change and evolve a little bit over time. The next element that I added in was this pad, and this is kind of, I feel like, a really big part of the sound here. So fucking sick and mystical. So this is a big part of the sound. I would say this is like really this was like the inspiration from that 6 a.m. track. It seems like there's like mostly just this sample, like with very sustained notes playing. So I was trying to emulate something like that here. In terms of any processing, we're just removing a lot of the low end and also a lot of the high end as well. And then as you can see here throughout the arrangement, playing with how much of the high end I'm that's opening up. To see at the beginning of the track, a lot of it's removed. Sorry, I'm gonna play it for you. And then at other points it opens up. So just like an arrangement trick to like increase how subtle it is, or like play with the subtlety throughout it, just by adjusting the low pass filter here. Throwing on this Tantra here, this is just like a cheat code for making things sound a little bit more interesting. If you play it all with a mix all the way up, so freaking awesome. I find just like playing with the presets and then like adjusting the mix so that it's not totally overcoming it, or sometimes slapping an LFO on that so it's like waving in and out how much of this effect is coming in throughout the arrangement for a more evolving technique is really, really cool, but I'm not really doing that too much here. Using an auto pan to kind of move it to left and right, more like sound design, air candy kind of stuff. And then nothing else really other than that. The next thing I added in was this subtle pluck sound. Let's have a listen to that. So doing a couple things here. This is I learned from like more of like the minimal house tutorials I've been doing quite a bit of. So on its own, it sounds like this. It's like a cool Eastern sounding drum beat, and then I've slapped a vocoder on it and set the carrier so that it's coming from the pad. So this way, like the rhythm and the hits of this, like that drum beat, is letting through the sound of the pad, and then it ends up sounding like this. So it's kind of almost like an extension of the pad, but with like a cool rhythmic kind of Eastern sounding vibe to it. Again, chucked on another Tantra here, dialed it into 50%, so it's kind of adding a bit of like that echoey weirdness to it. Super cool stuff there. And then standard channel strip stuff, so we're removing a bunch of the lows, a little bit of sidechain, a little bit of sustain, ducking it down to have a tighter sound there, especially since it's kind of like a plucky sound is kind of what we're going for. And then very simple elements here. There's nothing too much else that I want to show you, but I do want to show you this vocal throw technique that I've been doing quite a bit, and I don't think I've talked about in videos too much. So what I've been doing is grabbing like an empty audio clip here, and then throwing on this vocal throw preset that I've made, and basically it's just quarter notes with a really, really like deep feedback. So it's almost at 100%. So it's going to be echoing for a long ass time. And then the dry wet set to 100%. And then so this way, this vocal is just like it's not going to play the initial vocal. It's just going to have the delay play. And so that way this channel is just a delay channel that we have a lot more control over. So let me just show you what that sounds like. So there we're just catching kind of like the breath of the vocal, and then with everything it sounds cool. So I've been doing quite a bit of that, and then what I've also been doing is then resampling that echo. So what you can do is then have an additional track here, and if you set it to resampling and then just solo the vocal track, so that's the only thing playing, and then record it, it'll record all those echoes into an actual audio track. And I'll show you what that sounds like next, because I did do that with the breath bit here. So if you ever listen to maybe here, it would probably sound good. Let me solo it for you. So it's just that breath, and it's been turned to audio, so you just have a little bit more control over it. And then I've chucked on a Tantra, mixed into 12% of it. Standard channel strip stuff, won't go into too much of that. And this is just adding like a bit more of a texture. You can kind of hear it a lot, especially in the beginning of the tune. There we go. It's just adding like a slight little texture. It's like just like a way to kind of fill out the sound in a way that's not too heavy-handed. And we're reusing sounds, so we're resampling like the vocal to create this extra texture throughout the track. Very subtle stuff. This next one's a little bit more apparent. So if we have a listen to here and solo it here. So basically making this like cool vocal throw kind of thing. It's almost like in between like a lead and a pad and a texture. And I really like this idea. It's a really cool way to fill out like your layers without adding too many crazy sounds. So in this instance, I used the vocal throw technique to catch that A, and then resampled it into its own track, so I have more control over it, and can throw it throughout the arrangement. Subtle stuff again, and then just like a standard house string. I'll just quickly play that because I do have like a nice, if you can hear it, it's just sustaining one note. It's a classic technique in house music, but that's kind of it. It's a very subtle stuff. Now that we've like listened to it layer by layer, like have a listen to it all together. Uh, So pretty subtle stuff, and like these are just the techniques that I used here, but I would definitely encourage you to go crazy and do your own thing. So then at this point, what I would then do, now that we have like a solid sounding melodics, it's working well with the hook, and I know that this like tune is sounding good. Now I would actually go in and start building up the drums. So I'll quickly show you the layers for the drums here. And I'm going to turn everything off, and we're going to just go one by one real quick, kind of rip through it. So obviously the kick we've already done, and then what we're going to do is like, what I started it off with is I used that same percussion that we used as a with the vocoder technique with the pad, and I actually wanted to incorporate that here. So this sounds like this, and then that's how it is normally. And I threw the vocoder on just like as it was the default state, and then just played around with like the dry wet and fucked around a little bit with the whatever the hell this range part is, to add a bit more of like a percussive slap to everything. It's kind of like just a little subtle thing. I kind of like, it was like a happy accident, because as I was playing with like trying to add in this as a melodic part, I felt like it sounded pretty cool in a percussion sense as well. I wanted to find a way to incorporate it as well. But then the next thing is, main thing is when you're building up the drums is to kind of follow this sequence, like flick back and forth between your reference, and then pick the element that stands out the most to you. For me, that's usually like after the kick, it would be like the open hat or like the snare clap. In this instance, I heard the open hat, and the idea is to flick back and forth. And what we want to do is find the right pattern, then the right sound, and then we're just going to dial in the volume. So in terms of the pattern for the open hat, this is what it ended up with. Classic. Just like that offbeat pattern. So I've set up my template so it's automatically like that. And then that way I was able to just duplicate that over. If you click it on the piano roll here, it'll highlight everything in that row. And then if you press Option, then you can copy it over and drag it down. So that's usually how I do that super quickly. In terms of the sound design, what I've done is sliced out a piece of the actual hi-hat from the AI drums that we had, which sounded like this. And then I've just dialed the attack in. So like trying to remove the transient, like that initial hit of this sound, and just trying to get like the decay of it. And we're going to layer in our own sounds to get that kind of punchy transient hit there. So what I did is then right clicked and did show similar files to find some of the similar sounding hi-hats that are in my library. So I found this one here, which I panned a little, and then this one here. So one's a little bit more open, one's a bit less open. I panned one a bit more to the right and one a bit more to the left. And that way those are kind of hitting like the transient, and then the other part's adding more of like that nice vibe from the original tune. And then in terms of any processing, no sidechain, dialing in the sustain a little bit to tighten it up, and then just automatically removing the low because the template will automatically do that for me, which is nice. Next thing I like to layer in and then again, main thing, flicking back and forth between the reference and this, and really trying to focus our ear on that open hat and dial in the volume to sound similar to the reference track. The next element that I usually like to add in if I do open a hat is to reinforce that with a closed hat. So it'll start with like this pattern here, kind of just like same thing on that offbeat, and then I'll start adding in like the shuffly groove bits. So let me play this for you now. I'm gonna solo it. So main thing here is this is kind of like cool little shuffly kind of pattern that's going on. Just kind of did this by ear to taste, flicking back and forth from the reference in this to kind of create a little cool groove. And then I just set it up so that different hits are playing different sounds in an effort to kind of make a more of a humanization kind of effect to this. So it sounds almost more like a real drummer's playing it. In terms of the sounds, I have just this kind of setup here with like 4 or 5 of my favorite hi-hat sounds. This way I don't need to dig through a huge library. So I just have this set up in my template. So when I work on the hats, the shortcut's already there for me. And I did find one additional sound when I was doing the show similar sound functionality with the open hat. I found this open hat sound, that sounded a lot more like a closed hat, and I also added that into my drum rack here for the closed hats. Then we're just removing some of the attack, some of the sustain, so it's not hitting so hard. We're kind of almost trying to blend this in, make it more subtle, as compared to like the open hat, which we want like nice and bright and taking up a lot of attention there. Then we're just removing a bunch of the low end standard channel sort of stuff, channel strip stuff. Main thing is flicking back and forth to the reference, but when you're layering it in, it could be helpful to drag the volume here all the way down to nothing, and then kind of start bringing it in, and then as you start to hear it, dial it back a little bit, and then just kind of build it out to taste, really. Next element that I heard really coming through a lot was the clap. So let's have a listen to that. And soloed. Cool. So for the claps here, let's have a look at the pattern first. That's zoomed in a little too much. Okay, so it starts off basically, the template that I have is just on the 2 and the 4, 2 and the 4. So it's like a classic pattern for claps and snares to be on. So that's the jumping off point. And then what I usually like to do is, if you can just imagine just looking at this, these two, is having 2 claps playing, so you can have them kind of pan a little bit left and right. I usually like having the claps a little bit more stereo, and then like a snare in the middle, kind of creating a full cohesive picture of the snare and claps here. And then what I like to do is have additional hits here. So you can see on the first hit, third hit, and fourth hit, there's additional clap sounds playing nestled in, to kind of make it sound like, again, another kind of humanization thing. So we're trying to have like slight variations happening. It's super important in house music to keep things moving, even though it's such a repetitive beat. There's a lot of like little intricate things you can do like this to make it feel evolving and moving and fresh. In terms of the sound design, this is similar to the closed hats. I have a kind of a clap rack with a pre-selected like 6 or whatever this is of my favorite clap sounds. So it just gonna save me a lot of time, and also adds to like a sonic character and uniqueness from track to track. When you reuse elements and sounds, it can slowly kind of build up to have a subtle way to impact your sonic identity as an artist, because there's some familiarity and some thread going through track to track. So I think that's a really cool thing to do, and then it also saves you fucking time. So it's like a really nice double power there. In terms of any processing, just removing some sustain and removing some of the low end. Nothing too crazy there. Main thing is dialing back and forth between the reference and this and trying to get the volumes right. Then with the snares, if I do the clap first, then with the snares, I'm kind of doing that similar thing as the closed hats, where I'm nestling in the snare and choosing sounds that are trying to almost make the snare sound like it's cohesive and one with the clap. So let's have actually a listen to that first. And the solo snare. Okay, so in terms of the pattern, it's the 2 and the 4, 2 and the 4. So the template's already set up for me, so I can just move it around to pick the right sound. And then I added a little kind of flam extra note here, with like a huge velocity probability. So there's quite a bit of probability here of how hard it's going to hit. So sometimes it's a bit more of an obvious flam, and sometimes it's quite subtle and almost not even there. So again, that's making the sound evolve and change over time. In terms of the sound, again, I have with the snares like 4 or 5 of my favorite snare sounds, and I have this like extraction little thing that I use like for the filter envelope to clean up the kicks. Also on here, just in case I want to extract, like steal a slice from the AI drums or from the track. In this case, I did not do that. And then really nothing too crazy to show about the channel strip here. Main thing was bringing this in to match the volume of the claps, trying to nestle it underneath. And yeah, I think that's pretty good there. Then at this point, what I usually like to do is, after we have the core sound, so we have the kick with 1 shots, open hats, closed hats, claps and snares, core sounds with 1 shots, nice stuff from our library. I then like to incorporate top loops and breaks to add some extra character and like humanization and uniqueness to what we have going on here. It can sound quite like robotic and basic when you're programming stuff in, unless you're a fucking genius at this stuff, which I'm not. But I think you can get a lot more interesting sounds by layering in these like audio loops. So let's have a listen to the first one that I added in. Let's solo it. So main thing is I was trying to capture that like little percussive bongo roll that you can kind of hear in the in the another drum loop there. And so what I did is I do believe I might have did some envelope weird stuff. So let's have a look if I did that. Yeah, so what I've done is went over to the envelopes and used the gain on the envelope and then added in just like this. We're removing the gain down to 40% on these like hi-hat hits. So I'm trying to remove the hi-hat from this loop because I didn't want it. I wanted just like that like snare sound and that rolling kind of percussive drum sound in there. So that's a nice little trick that you can use to like further shape your top loops, make them more unique and like isolate out the parts that you're most interested in that top loop. Then we are also using the transient trick here. So set to beats with the arrow pointing to the right, we can dial back the transient so that it's tightening up the top loops. Really super important. I feel like when you're blending this in with your one shots, because it's going to help it like nestle into your core loop a lot more because things aren't like ringing out and sounding all loose and unprofessional. It's nice and tight and supporting your main stuff here. Doing a little bit more weird EQ than I normally do, to be honest, but we are rolling off the low end here. And then we have a combination of a high shelf and a low pass filter. Just trying to remove a bunch of the low end as normal, make room for the kick and the sub. And then trying to remove that hi-hat again from the EQ was the idea here. And then just bringing in a bit of the Q over here. So there's just a little bit of a bump in that like low mids area. Again, mostly trying to like isolate out that like bongo sound. A little bit of sidechain. Main thing is volumes though. So just flicking back and forth and trying to get a similar vibe in terms of your volume and their volume. Next top loop that I added in was this. Soloed. So you can hear this one is adding in a lot more of the extra hi-hat juice. A little bit of snares in there as well. What we're doing is tightening up with the transient beats transients trick here. And then removing lows, a little bit of sidechain, just nestling that in a little bit there. And then now is the shakers. So I think I could have made my shakers a little bit louder to match the another vibe. But again, you're trying to kind of use it as inspiration and then sort of go in your own direction. So for me, I felt like making it less shakery was what I ended up just gravitating towards. So let's have a listen to the first shaker that I added that is panned a little bit to the left, and the next one's going to be panned a little to the right. Solo that shit. So pretty subtle sound here. Not doing the transient trick. What we're doing is removing some lows, little side chain. Nothing too crazy. Let's add in the next one. And solo it. And yeah, so this is just another shaker here. One's panned a little bit more to the left, one's panned a bit more to the right. Trying to create like a different sound textures. So it's not just one shaker loop sounds like it's just been dropped onto the drum loop. There's a couple and they're kind of playing against each other kind of thing. And then the last one that I added was this right here. And then soloed. So again, went for like an Arabic kind of sounding drum loop. This one's quite subtly mixed in, and it's just trying to emphasize that bongo-y kind of sound that we've added in, and that is very present in the another tune. And then this is just a ride. It's just a ride track, like a ride cymbal that I play at certain points in the arrangement to kind of like increase the energy. And I think that'd be the best point to get into next, because really the main idea here is like to build out your loop with the melodic stuff first and make sure that it's working with your hook. And then you can go and recreate the drums, I think, quite simply with like the techniques that I'm showing you here. And then the idea would be to like really know that you feel confident with the core layers in the melodic area that you've added in. I felt really confident with like these three, the pads and the two kind of like Afro house dingy sounds. But you might also want to consider overproducing here. So that you have more to work with when it gets to the phase of structuring, which is what we're going to get into next. So when it comes to structuring your track, it can really be like the easiest possible thing. And so what I'd like you to imagine here is, imagine this all as like puzzle pieces. So you have like the kick, the bass, the drums, the melodic stuff, and the vocals. And so what you can do is, I've been doing this quite a lot lately, is I've been calling it like a dry structure. So what you can do is just look at the arrangement with the arrangement track for the song that you've made, and then just blindly set it up. So the intro might be like just drums probably. So we'll just grab all the drums and just do that blindly. Then this drop is coming in. So let's move everything over. So it's starting there, the bass is in, the melodic stuff's in, and then you can just kind of like do it dry. Then the break comes in, so let's just remove the kick. We're gonna grab all the kicks and press 0 to disable it so we can turn it back on if we want to. And then you can just like do this process. This is a weird arrangement. I didn't love this, just like drop, little break, drop, and then it's over. So I went a little bit different on how I made my arrangement. For me, there's like an intro, then the sub comes in, then the first drop, a larger break, a drop, weird little break, a larger drop. So song builds down, a final break before the outro, which I thought was interesting, and then the outro. So I'll just quickly show you the idea here, because at this point, once you have like the dry arrangement, what I usually would do is just like work through each section, flick back and forth between the reference and like what you're building on, and kind of copy the layering that's going on in the reference. And then also pay a little bit more attention to what's happening in the last little bit going into the next section, because there's usually some kind of tension building technique, something's getting cut out or something like that you want to pay attention to help the flow of your own transitions work a little bit better. So for this one, I'll just kind of quickly go through it. Starts off with just kind of your classic drum intro, with a bit of like melodic stuff, because I noticed that wasn't in the Another tune. And then every 8 bars or so, there's going to be usually some kind of change, either a micro change or a larger change, like a new section. So after the first 8 bars, the kick comes in. And I slowly filtered in the bass. Boom. And then the subs in. Then a ride comes in on the second half. And a little like drop of the kick before the like removal of the kick before the drop comes in. Vocals in. Boom, a little break. With the sick vocals. And then into the drop. So cool with the vocals there. Second half, ride comes in, builds up the energy, and the other vocal comes in. A little bit of a break here. Kind of made this part to kind of have a lot more vocals. You kind of want to almost envision it as like imagine like a line, and it's like an energy line. You kind of want to have it so it's starting low, building up a bit, dropping, so there's a bit of tension, then the next drop comes, and ultimately you want to build up to like a climax in your song, like the point where as much as happening as possible. And I think really that helps, because you're having a 30,000 foot view of the arrangement when you're building. So you know, like the intro, like it doesn't need to sound huge and massive, because its purpose is to set up the next point. And each point, like then that first drop doesn't need to be super massive, because you got to remember you want that like main last drop to be the climax of the song. So it gives you like a lot of context and allows you to like relax a little bit. Don't go too crazy, because you're trying to create a full cohesive tune here. That's kind of a good look there. I would say if you grab the project files, you're going to want to have a look, because there's a lot of like, I'll throw master effects channels to cut out the lows and add like kind of reverb and cool delays as like transition tricks. There's a lot of automation. So like filtering in vocals, filtering out elements. I think that's a nice trick too. So like instead of just having it so like the sound just appears on the drop, you can kind of filter it in across like say, but the 16 bars here, the 8 bars before. So it sounds more natural and is expected when it comes in. So there's a lot of cool little automation tricks that you can do there for sure. And then one thing that I'll definitely do to kind of end the structuring point is add in all this kind of stuff, like fucking lasers and like crashes and reverse crashes. The trick here, I would say, is subtlety. Like it sounds cheesy when you have like a huge riser sound, right? But when it's subtle and it's just reinforcing the other elements of your song, it can really make things sound a lot fuller and awesomer. And then one trick that I've been doing lately is Like for this one, for example, I've saved all my project files, and you can do the same thing for your project files, or if you get access to my entire library, you can do the same thing. But what I did is I just went into like when I did How You Feel by them, went into the project file, and you can go into the actual project file and see every single group and layer. And then I grabbed the effects layer, dropped that in, and then boom, I had like rolls and crashes and stuff all like kind of in a similar spot. You do have to go through it and adjust the volumes a bit and make sure that like the arrangement's lining up and all that, but it's massive time saver, I would say. And then last thing after that is the pick 3. So what I'll do like at this point is pick the 3 things that are gonna have the biggest impact on the final song and on the listener. Do those 3 changes and then move on. And then a little bit of mix and mastering. The main thing is on like the groups here, I'm adding a little compressor and a little clipping, and then running into like a cascade of like clippers and limiters on the master. I do promise to do a video on that at some point, but the idea is just to do it quickly, get to a point where it just sounds kind of pretty good, and it's loud enough for you to use in DJ sets and competitive when you're sending it out to labels. And that's a pretty good look at that. So again, definitely check out the project file, because there's a lot of intricate details that I can't get into every little thing, particularly when it comes to the arrangement. A lot of that automation, like it's useful to look at it and see how it's moving in from section to section, and there's a lot to be learned from that in particular. But with that said, let's jump into a recap of the 80/20 rule. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here, and if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80/20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80/20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80/20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now, and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.